back to the second half of our Policy, Governance, and Trust Day. We have already had an incredible week talking about major themes in human rights, entertainment and media, medical XR, and children's safety. Today's conversation, have continued to engage us in thinking about the risks and opportunities of the metaverse. While we've talked all this morning about the role of regulators and governments, we want to take a deep dive into corporate sphere, as corporations play an ever important role in the metaverse ecosystem as consumers as well as those building out the next iteration of the internet. For our next panel, let's welcome to stage Rob Sherman, Aisha Pioti, Nikki Hickman, who we are still trying to get, but hopefully she'll join us shortly, and moderating Christina Podnar. First of all, Rob is Vice President and Deputy Chief Privacy Officer for Policy at Meta. Since joining the company, then called Facebook, in 2012, Rob and his team has worked closely with privacy and policy experts inside and outside the company, along with product, engineering, research, and other teams to protect people's privacy across the company's suite of products and technology. Rob has worked to develop approaches within the company and in public policy to promote the responsible development of new technologies like artificial intelligence and virtual and augmented reality. Before joining the company, Rob advised technology and media companies as a lawyer, Covington and Burling LLP. I personally have had the honor to speak and interact with Rob in real life as Rob continues to and also helped launch Beyond Inclusion by CyberXR Coalition, and so grateful for Rob's leadership there to ensure inclusion in these new technologies. Next is Aisha. Aisha is the managing partner at the Swiss-based firm Edge Horizon and the director of AI policy at the Center of Law and Economics of the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology, ETH Zurich. Her passion is to build bridges between the needs of policymakers, companies, and societies at large on emerging issues, primarily digital technologies. Her expertise combines strategic foresight, innovation, and research with multi-stakeholder collaboration to help society capture the benefits of new technologies in responsible and way. Nikki is a freelance product and innovation consultant and researcher specializing in digital identity and digital inclusion. She's a co-chair of the Human Experience Working Group at Trust Over IP Foundation and industry contributor at Blockchain and Identity Lab. And moderating this panel, we have Christina Podnar, my friend Christina Podnar, a global digital policy advisor here at XRSI and a founding member of the Metaverse Reality Check. Christina is a digital policy innovator who over 2 decades now has worked with some of the most high-profile companies, governments, and non-governmental entities policies as opportunities to free the organization from uncertainty, risk, and internal chaos. More importantly, she helps digital teams unlock opportunities, strengthen the brand, and liberate employees to drive innovation aligned with business strategies. And I can honestly say, every time I have encountered governmental and global conversations, Christina is the first voice that I look to for guidance. Thank you, Christina. Welcome to all of you, and I look forward to this conversation. Christina, please take it away.
Thanks so much, Kavya. Really appreciate that generous introduction. And I see that Nikki's in the back of our hall. Hopefully she'll be able to make it onto the stage. But in the meantime, I want to say a big welcome and a big thank you to Rob and Aisha for being on stage with us today. I'm grateful to you for guiding us through a really interesting conversation. And I know that because in the pre-call, we really had already kicked things off well and gotten ourselves deep into discussion. But really want to get into how the future of work will be done as we move towards the metaverse. It seems very exciting, also very unknown in some ways. But as we see this technology paradigm emerging and promising to fundamentally re-engineer industries, economies, and societies, and even our daily life, I'm wondering whether what we've seen happen over the last 10 years, since we've had a last big kind of shift, if you will, social media cloud, if you consider it from that way, to today, or even in 10 years from now, what the metaverse could look like for all of us. So Rob, maybe I can put you on the spot first to take out your crystal ball. I know you probably have at least one. And tell us a little bit about what you think corporations and corporate work might look like 10 years from now as we start working or continue working in the metaverse.
Well, thank you so much, Christina and Kavya and everybody at XRSI. Thank you so much for having me. This is a really important conversation. I am a believer in, I don't have a crystal ball, sadly, but am a really big believer in the future of the technology that we're all building together. And that's why I'm here and why the kind of conversation that we're having in this space is really so critical. So even though I don't have a crystal ball, I do think that, we have all gotten a little bit of a window into how the metaverse can change the ways that we work as a society and as organizations throughout the past couple of years with COVID. And maybe I can talk a little bit about this just from the lens of my company, Meta, and how we've been approaching things and how work has changed. And so, I think there are some immediate changes that we've seen that I'll talk about, but that also there's a really interesting discussion that I hope we can have on this panel about what changes look like as we look, 5-10 years into the future, and how all of the way that all of us work is actually going to change. But before we get there, maybe a little bit about how work has changed for us as we've built these technologies and have started using them in our organization. So obviously, because of COVID, pretty much all of us were forced to do our work in a distributed way. That wasn't always the norm at our company, but certainly became that way as people were working in a distributed way. And I think, one of the things that we all realized is, as people are in different places, staring at a Zoom screen all the time is just not a, natural way of interacting. It's not something that humans are sort of built to do, is just stare at one point on a screen. And just even as we're in this conversation, being able to look around at each other, have spatial audio, these kinds of things make it very different. And so we've been using things like virtual reality. We have a product called Workrooms that is a virtual conferencing product that allows us to meet with each other in virtual space, even when we're physically in different places. So that's nice and helpful for normal work meetings, but where it actually shines is the ability to use mixed reality and virtual reality for things like design. So as you're and for collaboration. So as you're collaborating in building, whether it's new software or a design for a building or any of these kinds of things, the ability to do that is really, really powerful. We've been investing a lot, not only in our own organization, but also just sort of thinking about what it looks like to build technology that can help other organizations to collaborate, whether those are large organizations like ours or small organizations. And so that involves things like the partnership that we announced with Microsoft on making Teams and Microsoft 365 and Azure Active Directory work with Quest and building open APIs. So, for example, we announced a partnership with Spotify to help them integrate in our platform too. And so I think these things are going to be really important because the kinds of use cases that people will care about are going to be very different. And when I look at sort of the longer term future beyond sort of how people are using this technology today, if we think about the metaverse less as VR and more as augmented reality, as being able to overlay on top of the physical experience that we have, I think the ability to have a conversation like this, and for all of us from lots of different disciplines and different parts of the world to come together and have a conversation to we're standing here in the Taj Mahal, which is not a place where we normally would be having a conversation like this, but really the ability to bridge cultures and to bring people together so that we can collaborate and see each other is really, really important. And so I think that's something that's going to touch all of us. And then the final thing I'll say is, I think the real promise, in addition to things like bringing people together and design, is for there are a lot of already seeing organizations use this technology for training, whether that's healthcare training and helping healthcare providers learn how to use personal protective equipment and those sorts of things. Telemedicine is going to be a huge area of focus. Education, there are organizations that are using virtual and augmented reality to help reach kids who otherwise wouldn't have access to this. And so depending on what I think the applications for specific sectors like that are just beginning to grow, but I'm really actually quite excited about the things that we can't do today that this technology will make possible.
That's really great to hear, Rob. I'm personally very excited. I was thinking about this earlier today. I hadn't been feeling very well the last few days, but the opportunity to show up in VR actually got me more excited. I felt like even though I'm a little bit pale, I can still be here and I can show up the way that I would like to show up, rather probably than what I look like in my physical incarnation. So are you seeing people get really excited about the opportunities and in some ways getting to show up the way that they want to show up at work?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really, first of all, it's early even for us. Although we've been, for most of the time that we've been remote, we've been able to have to have virtual meetings and things like that. I think it is really engaging in a way that sort of endless Zoom calls have not been, just for being able to be with people and spend time with people. But one of the things that our experiences, and that I think there's research that's showing now, is that actually, being able to locate each other in space, being able to experience things together, and to be able to work on things. So as we're designing something, seeing it actually come to life in front of us, like these kinds of capabilities are really just energizing in a way that being distributed hasn't been. But I also think that the world's workforce is going to be distributed, right? We're not going back to a world where everybody is in the same physical space in the way that we were, and so I think it is really exciting. What I'm most excited about is the technology that we have today, and this kind of gathering is something that we wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. But what I'm really excited about is actually sort of the new technology as we start to overlay virtual experiences on top of the physical world, and be able to really integrate the two in a more meaningful way.
Spot on. No, that's really great. Aisha, I want to turn to you because I think it's interesting when we start talking about this sort of new world that's coming. It holds so much promise, so much opportunity. It's certainly exciting. But also I've heard, colleagues tell me that they're a little bit hesitant. They're not really sure what that looks like yet. Arguably, we all probably don't know what it looks like because we haven't experienced it yet. But, helping people kind of get beyond those hesitations is the role, I think, of regulators and a good governance model. So when it comes to governance of the metaverse and given your experience with AI policies, what would be your suggestions with regards to how companies and policymakers should approach this topic right now to ensure that we all feel comfortable taking this leap into what the future holds for all of us?
Thank you very much. First of all, it's a great pleasure also for me to be here. Thanks for the invitation. So indeed, I mean, you're very right. I think it's quite clear that there is obviously a lot of promise, right, for these new technologies. But at the same time, I think there are obviously concerns as well. And I'm not going to go, of course, into many of them. But this does mean that we will be thinking about regulation or essentially governance. And governance for me is really a way to build trust in technologies, to indeed, also to lead to adoption. So think about what type of governance we should be looking at and how to go about it. I think there are a few different dimensions we should be thinking about. I think we have, as companies, it's about what companies can do internally and what sort of they can do externally as well in terms of actions. And of course, for governance, it's also about what policymakers should be really doing more, right? So, I mean, I'm not going to go into too many details, but just to give a sort of a top line, and then I'd love to sort of discuss it a bit more with the rest of you. I think it's very important for businesses, first and foremost, to start to prioritize this topic, prioritize the governance, and build an action plan for internal and external engagement. And when you look at it from an internal perspective, I think the objective really has to be to manage risk, right? And risk essentially because, of course, there's these two, there's the opportunities, but there are also these concerns that are being raised. So there is need to manage risk. To a certain extent, preempt government action, right? And by government action, I mean sort of hard law or knee-jerk regulations, which we all know tend to come in when if something goes wrong and it's not been sort of governed in the right way. So that's the first, and we can go afterwards into what kind of things we can do there. But externally, I think it's also very important for companies to really start building the bridge with regulators, with external stakeholders on governance, and also in a way to follow what those trends are. And then, and then there's a lot more that can be done. And I was just listening, just to the tail end of the last panel, which was on governance as well. And I think there is really a need to work together, for businesses to work together with regulators to help sort of even test the practicality of the policies being considered, right? And when you specifically in the area of work, I was thinking what would be quite important would be even think about working with labor organizations, right? And starting to consult with them, starting to talk to them about any concerns that exist. I know, for example, IBM in 2020 in Germany, they sort of work with local works council for best practice agreements. So indeed, transparency is going to be very important. To consult with your own employees with regards to what their views are, how they would like to go forward, but also with external partners. I think another last point I'd like to make is about, when it comes to metaverse and all these new technologies, and if I put the lens of sort of future of work on there as well, there has to be and there will be a need to really reinvest in reskilling for the workforce, right, and helping them through this transition, because it's probably not as it's easy for everybody to be working in these, and I think we've got to be wary of that and start thinking about those. I'll stop there because, of course, I have also some things that policymakers and the rest of the world be doing, but I don't want to bore everybody with that now, and we can probably come to that later. So that'd be probably what I'd say to start with.
That's a great insight. I'm picking up especially on this partnership theme that you mentioned several times, and being the fact that you're coming to us from Switzerland, it seems like the ultimate neutral spot where there's a lot of partnership between regulators, between businesses, between civil society. I'm wondering, just from what you've been hearing on the ground, I know you're practicing heavily in the AI space, but metaverse being so adjacent to that. Are you seeing the dialogue already starting for the metaverse, or are we sort of still in the fringes and haven't taken that leap yet in the Switzerland arena?
I think Switzerland is a special place, right? So as for those of you listening in, I mean, we are very much in the center of Europe, but not necessarily part of the European Union, right? So even when it comes to AI and regulation and governance around AI, I think we sort of not necessarily following exactly what's happening in the EU. And for those of you probably maybe not well versed, I mean, EU is very advanced when it comes to sort of binding, proposing binding regulations around artificial intelligence, but also other technologies. We also have the Digital Marketing Act, Digital Services Act, which is all looking at online technologies and how we should be looking and governing them. But when it comes to Switzerland, I would say we are definitely neutral, but also very pragmatic, very business friendly sort of approach to governance. And essentially, I'd say to some extent, we are kind of closer to the US in a view that we don't necessarily probably need to make new legislations and new laws, but essentially just look at what we have and see what the fit gap has to be with regards to new technologies. And also very, I would say, tech neutral approach, which is that we're not going to regulate or govern specifically technologies, but the use and the impact of that. So coming back to your question, whether we are really already onto metaverse, I would say in Switzerland, not so much. I think we are still even just catching up with artificial intelligence and thinking about it. as one of our federal councils sort of said once, we don't do it in a hurry. We don't want to be first, but we want to do it right, and that's the way Switzerland approaches things.
That's great. Thank you. I see Nikki on stage. Nikki, are you able to join us properly now with full controls, or at least some controls? Well, we have Nikki on stage, but I don't hear her yet. So we're going to give her the opportunity to join us in a few minutes if and when she's ready. But in the meantime, I want to come back to you, Rob, because I'm thinking about what Aisha just said and thinking about sort of the Swiss perspective. I think in the US, we might be 1 or 2 steps ahead here. Do you think we'll see a new field of competition open up alongside, new markets, new consumer preferences, and new business models as the metaverse becomes a part of not just the marketplace, but also how we work and where we spend the majority of our day hours?
Yeah, I mean, I think actually a lot of what Aisha just talked about resonated a lot for me, and I think I'm hearing myself a little bit, so maybe we can others. We'll see. Yeah, I mean, I was saying that a lot of what Aisha said really resonated for me in part because, thinking about the range of people who will use this technology and how it will be used is really important. When we first started talking in a fulsome way about our approach to building technology for the metaverse as a company, one of the things that we talked a lot about is really what it takes to do that responsibly. And so you talked about some of those in terms of workers' rights and works councils and things like that. Certainly privacy is incredibly important. It's what I spend a majority of my time thinking about. Keeping people safe is really important. But one of the things that's also we've heard pretty consistently from lots of different groups is like making it possible for people to earn a living for the work that they do, and doing that in a responsible way is an additionally important part of what it takes to build a future ecosystem around the metaverse. And so that means if you start with the idea that there won't be separate metaverses for separate companies, but instead there will be a metaverse the way there is an internet today, then what that means is we have to actually be really thoughtful about a full range of ways that people will earn a living from the work that they do, whether that's software developers who can sell software or subscriptions, whether that's creators who can encourage people to pay for tickets or for access to their events, whether that's artists who can sell their products, or designers who can sell products. There's a huge range of different business models that I think will just that have already started to evolve and that we will see continue to exist. There are going to be retail stores in the metaverse that a lot of the companies that we're used to interacting with today are offering, and that's something we've certainly seen. And so I think a lot of the discussion that Aisha is raising about thinking about the role of regulation and thinking about our role as a technology creator is really thinking about creating space for all of the different ways that people may want to earn a living and grow and build competitive products and services. I think our starting point for a lot of that is doing that openly in a way that allows other companies to come and offer technology and offer their products and services is going to be a really critical part of it too.
Thank you so much, Rob. I've had the chance in recent weeks to speak with several of your colleagues at Meta, and one of the things that I hear you're heavily focused on is really taking a lot of lessons learned to date and applying it going forward. It's really, really, I think, exciting to hear that, quite frankly. So I'm just wondering, as you're thinking about applying lessons learned from Web 2.0 as we head into the metaverse, what are some of the specifically human things that you want to take forward as a company?
Yeah, I mean, it really is just as, for myself personally, it's something that I feel a lot of humility about, like as we're building this technology for the world, doing it in a way that optimizes for, as many people to have opportunities as possible, but also to be as thoughtful as possible is really a core responsibility. It's why actually, why we're here today, why I personally am invested in this kind of a conversation. I mean, I mentioned a couple of different areas where we're we're focused. And I think, privacy, safety, and security, a lot of the conversations that we're having, in Metaverse Safety Week this week are really quite essential to the future that we are building, right? People won't choose to adopt this as as consumers, but certainly businesses won't want to use this technology if we're not thoughtful about making sure that it's safe and that it's secure and that they can operate in an effective way. And so a lot of the lessons that we've learned about how to make sure that data is being used in a responsible way and that people are protected, that's going to be really important. But also thinking about different worlds that creators might create and giving them the tools so that as they're establishing rules for their worlds, that they have actually the ability to enforce them and make sure that things are done in a responsible way and that they can make sure that people are protected when they're in their space, just like they could in a physical space. But one thing that I haven't mentioned that I think is also really important is this idea, and Kavya mentioned the work that XRSI is doing to make sure that there's equity and that there's inclusion and ability for people from diverse backgrounds to enter the XR space. That's something that's is really important to me personally. But I also think it's a more fundamental responsibility that we have to make sure that as we're building these technologies, then they are a force for leveling the playing field in a lot of ways and giving people opportunities that they might not have in today's physical spaces or in today's economy. And so, I think a lot about, what that looks like in terms of, access to technology. I mean, some of us are here in virtual reality using virtual reality headsets, but some of us are using desktop computers to connect to this space and listen, and thinking about making sure that people can use technology and access the metaverse regardless of what kind of hardware they have. That's a really important part. But then there are also these aspects that are really inherent in XR technology that I think have a real opportunity to level the playing field in terms of, giving more people access to work, giving more people access to business and those sorts of things. And so, for example, thinking about XR technology in terms of accessibility. Right. So making sure that, in the future, as we have this kind of conversation, we might all be speaking different languages and be able to get real-time translation so we can understand what each other are saying. Or we might be able to get closed captioning. So if I am not hearing, I can still access this space. And as I walk around and interact with people, I can interact with them even though I don't have the ability to hear them. And you can imagine a huge range of capabilities like that, particularly when we move beyond virtual reality to thinking about the metaverse as a mixed virtual and physical space. One of the things I'm most excited about is using that technology to give more people opportunities. And I think that, when your question is sort of what did we learn, what did I learn? I think a lot of them are sort of the classical safety and privacy and those sorts of things. But I also am optimistic about the promise of technology for really giving people access to opportunities and providing equity wherever we can, using the unique capability that technology has.
Great, thank you. Nikki, you just heard Rob. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to comment, just say a question also for Rob. Could I do that now already?
You know what, let me come back to you just in 1 second, Aisha, because I really want to involve Nikki into this conversation. So hold that thought just for 1 second. I actually want to go to Nikki, and Nikki, you just heard Rob talk about being thoughtful about how people are making a living, thinking about trust. How might the metaverse reframe human-centered experiences, and what will it take to deliver truly trusted experiences? Maybe you can go ahead and unmute yourself and give us your thoughts here.
Yeah. Hi, Christina. Can you hear me?
We sure can.
Oh, brilliant. I do apologize for my kind of technical ineptitude. So I think, that's kind of a key question. And there's obviously a lot of debate about whether it's trust or trustworthiness. And for me, the key questions are human agency, this kind of autonomy of decision making. What side is the compute on? Who controls the data? And secondly, the kind of transparency around that in terms of the authenticity of those that we're interacting with. And for us to achieve that, I think we need to recognize that the lines between man and machine, between virtual and real, between physical and logical, these are all very blurred now. And so instead of separating ourselves, we're in the metaverse or we're in the real world, I think the way to build trust in that is to kind of bring a congruity to things, and recognize that that our human experience is a combined set of experiences which are both in the metaverse and digital, but also in the real world, and both of those have to have integrity, both real and virtual experiences. I don't think we need to just lose some of those oppositions, some of those separations.
Do you think we're getting closer to that, or what type of work is going to be necessary to get us there?
Very important work in terms of resetting some of the power imbalances and enabling verification from the edge in multiple environments. So if we think about some simple things, some simple claims that an organization like Meta might make in terms of who's in the room, whether their digital persona truly represents they are and the purpose of being in the room. And there's, as Rob says, there's a bunch of trust equations and calculations and decisions that need to be made at that. So I think we need to really consider about this kind of balance of governance, who verifies who is issuing credentials. If we think, my expertise is digital identity, and all the time in digital worlds, individual consumers or workers or mortgage applicants or refugees are claiming a form of identity, certain credentials about them, and they spend a lot of time proving those things. And there's a huge business in that. It's called KYC or ID&V businesses. I think Metaverse, to fix what's gone wrong in Web 2, if you like, we need to have that counterbalance. So if you claim, for example, that children are protected in Metaverse environments, there should be a way of parents and children verifying that, providing issuance of credentials, for example. So that's the way I see that we need to really be taking attention to everything that an organization or a big business or a government does. How can that be counterbalanced through these very lifelike, immersive, intuitive experiences, so the identity interactions, data exchanges, value exchanges, our work, our gaming, our kind of life stuff, all of those are truly reflected and qualified in the metaverse.
Thanks,
That makes
Nikki.
a little bit of sense.
No, that does make sense, especially as we start to think about the broader paradigm, right? It's something that we definitely need to do when we start thinking about the metaverse, because it entails so many different facets of who we are, how we show up, who's at the table, who isn't, and how that works and how we balance out the powers. But at the core is trust. And Aisha, trust is something that you know a lot about. You've been talking about trust from an AI perspective for some years now. So coming back to you for your thoughts on, trust and maybe lessons learned from an AI perspective that we can actually apply here as well. And also want to be able to tap you on the shoulder and give you a chance to ask Rob your question.
Well, thank you. Thanks for that. So, no, I just wanted to, again, and I think that's going in the right way now, because we're talking about sort of the broader perspective, right? And here I'm thinking about also, I was listening to Rob, and I can see this enthusiasm, and I can see all of this good way that we can, we can have inclusion. But just a little comment. I mean, when I was recently at sort of a global seminar for diplomats, and Metaverse came up, and there was part of the discussions around that, and it was actually very clear from participants from Africa, from Asia, from other parts of the world, and this little quote came in and said, Metaverse is really a technology that is built by the West for the West. And the thinking was that, well, it's actually not very inclusive, because given the high cost of infrastructure, computational power that it's going to require, a large part of the world is not even going to have access to that. I just, that's just a comment, and I'm just wondering, and of course, Meta being a global company and everything, and my question was more for Rob to sort of say, how would you respond to that? And do you think today you see the promise as much in sort of the United States and Europe and that part of the world, and how would you like to extend that to the rest? And then of course I can answer the question as well. I don't know how you want to go about it. Shall we do that first, and then I give you my thoughts on AI?
Sounds like a plan. Let's do it.
All right, sure. So, I think it's exactly the right question, Aisha. One of the things that is true, going back to my point about access and accessibility and inclusion, the reality is that, most of the people who use the internet today are not in the United States or in Europe. And if we're going to build technology, it needs to be technology built by everyone and built for everyone. And that means things like, I talked earlier about making sure that metaverse experiences are accessible to people who don't have high-end headsets. That's an important piece of it. But the other piece is, different people in different parts of the world are going to need to use this technology in different ways, just like they use today's technology in different ways. And so, Christina, you had asked about sort of what's a learning from Web 2.0. And I think one of my learnings, and also I think one of the great opportunities of the moment that we are in right now, is we have the ability to build the technology with uses in mind and understanding the wide range of ways people will want to use this technology. And so, and one of the things that we've been doing as a company is we've been investing, we have a research and programs fund and an immersive learning fund, where we're spending millions of dollars to jumpstart the ability of people all around the world to use this technology in lots of different ways. So that involves, in Korea, people being able to use XR technology to enable education for people in remote areas where they wouldn't have access to it. Those kinds of things. And in India, thinking about, how to use augmented reality to expand the reach of creators. These are just a couple of examples, but I think really the reality is not only will individual people using technology care about it differently and use it differently, but thinking about the range of ways that different economies around the world, different creators, and different users will need this technology to work is really important. The last thing I'll say, and then I'll turn it back to you to talk about the AI question, is when we think about the way that people work today, there's lots of changes that go on, certainly culturally between countries in different parts of the world. And I talked before about the positive aspect of that and the opportunity to bring, I can, be in the Taj Mahal. We can all be here together, even though we're in different places. I think that's really powerful. But also the reality of work is knowing that, people behave differently. They bring a different version of their identity to work. right? And that's true across cultures, and it's true for people even in one single place. And so part of the way we have to think about that is to know, the way that I'll dress when I'm in a business meeting is different than the way that I'll dress when I'm at home with my kids. And the way that I'll behave is going to be different too. And so giving people the ability to make choices about how they want to identify, again, whether that's formal attire versus informal attire, but also, the way they want to express gender, the way they want to express ethnicity, the way they want to express religion. Like, these are all choices that we all make as we show up at work. And, if we are going to enable those kinds of things and enable people to have autonomy, as Nikki was saying, then we have to actually be thinking about that as we're building the technology now, not 5 years or 10 years from now when we start to realize that people are having these problems. And so that's a big area where I think we have a responsibility to focus, but that's also why, having a bunch of conversations and actually funding research by experts around the world is a big part of where we're focused right now.
Thanks so much, Rob. Aisha, let me give you the opportunity to also answer your AI question before we move on too far.
No, so thank you for that. And I think that obviously there's a lot of parallels that we could make with what's happening in AI, and I could share a little bit on that one. And essentially, I do believe that many of those issues that we are seeing in AI, of course, also in terms of concerns, are also there for the metaverse. With the metaverse, potentially we need to think about a few more unintended consequences. I would think more, employee, individual safety, cyber harassment. Maybe those such things might be a bit magnified, and of course, there's one which is kind of concerning, and I think for that one that is being talked about is sort of what is going to be really the physical and psychological impact on health of such things if we're really going to go into virtual. But that's another story. And I think I'll go back to AI and essentially what's been happening there. So I think for me, and I'm truly a strong believer of the fact that in a democratic society, really effective governance is I would say, the clear way to move forward with building trust in new technologies. So it essentially, because once you put something on the table, there is a lot of discussion, there is a lot of collaboration, and we end up with something hopefully that is all voices are heard. Now, when we come to AI, I would say that it's not so easy at the moment, and I would try to sort of highlight three main reasons why, and three challenges that are currently coming up in terms of when you're looking at governance or regulations, I would say, particularly in this area, and to a certain extent, then we can discuss how that could pan out also for the metaverse. I mean, the first and foremost, I think there's an inherent tension in the debate, right? There's a big camp that is about, should we really regulate new technologies or should we not? And if we do regulate, should we go with hard law or should it be sort of soft law mechanisms, right? And general mindset, and I think it's, people in this room are of course privy to that, is that policy and regulations are really a burden and they're going to inhibit your innovation. And that's the case with AI, and I would say many new technologies as well. And there's another sort of feeling that, well, regulators don't really understand technology, so they will always be a step behind, so basically we shouldn't be doing it. And that kind of discussion is happening in the AI world as well. The other one is, of course, the other side is talking about, no, we really should go ahead. I mean, because of course, without regulation, there's going to be an erosion of trust, and essentially legal uncertainty could in fact be an obstacle to innovation. So this camp really argues that businesses would like stability, predictability. They need to have secure investments, and therefore they need to have some kind of governance and potentially also regulation around these technologies. And of course, businesses have this risk that if they are not regulated, they can get sort of from one day to other very extreme regulations that are in place, and that could be very, very bad for them. So the first one I would say is this tension in this debate, and this is happening in different sectors of the society, and this is sort of a very lively debate going on all the time. The second one I would say, and that is more again taking a kind of a macro approach to this topic, is that there are today very different geopolitical approaches, different motivations to AI regulations when we look around different parts of the world. And all the global regions are not necessarily participating equally in policy debate, right? So So when we look at that, I mean, and I mentioned it a little bit before, European Union is actually looking at very binding regulation when it comes to artificial intelligence, and of course in other areas as well. And they were the first ones with the GDPR and the consequent Brussels effect and extraterritorial reach, and they're expecting the same also for the AI. Of course, have the US, and you know that better than me. Not very much appetite for new laws, but sort of thinking about it, but not at a federal level. Certainly, you have California and New York potentially, but too much. And then you've got China, which is, funnily enough, we can question the intention of the government, but recently they have actually come up with sort of data protection, algorithm, transparency, deep fakes, even very recently deep fake legislation, which is going to come apparently into place in January 2022. I think there is a second challenge for me is this, that you have all these different approaches, right? And how do you go about something which is making sense? So if you're a company, you want to, basically be in all different parts of the world, but different parts of the world thinking differently on this. And the last point, which I think is not highlighted very much, but I think is important and is linked a little bit to what we are discussing, which is work and skills and capacities. I think it's very, very clear, and also in the discussions now, even at the European Union level, and I was just there in Brussels recently, it became very clear is that there is one of the biggest constraints that we're going to have, even if you do have regulations, even if these things are out there, how do we actually enforce them? And in order to enforce them, you need resources. And today, those resources are very scarce, or more certainly, those resources are not in the public sector. So there is a big need also to essentially think about, capacity building. Capacity building, not only when we look at the private sector within the private sector and skills, but actually in the public sector as well. And that's something that I would think that we can discuss further. But these are the three challenges we see when it comes to AI, and maybe some of these are also going to be present for the metaverse.
Thank you so much, Aisha. I think that's a lot of really good thought there. I want to just really quickly come back, Nikki, to you 1 second, and ask you to chime in here, because I think Aisha's brought up so many really great points around digital identity, the complexity that we see when we start to look globally at what does digital identity mean, and then how do we actually have inclusion in the corporate metaverse when there is this complexity around digital identity. Is there a technical solution to that? Is it standards? What do you see as our ability to, I guess, address that challenge? And also, what do we need to be thinking about right now?
I was really reflecting on what you were saying, Aisha, and I was reminded of political philosopher, actually, Thomas Paine, and the opportunity that we now have with regards to governance in metaverse. And he said, talking about the French Revolution and new forms of governance, that the only valid form of government is one that's a compact of the people. And I kind of see the metaverse, perhaps, I'm a historian, that's my degree. It seems like it's stepping back, but it's a more personal, more consensual, let's get in the forum again and use the metaverse so that people can write their own rules. I mean, I spent some time recently working with a bunch of guys from UNICEF and a youth group from young people from all over the world, and we were writing a governance framework for the YOMA, the Youth Agency Marketplace ecosystem, which is based on decentralized or self-sovereign identity. And it was all in the process, right? It was all in the, right, what are the rules that we're going to live and work and operate by? How are we going to treat each other? What are our respective rights and duties? How do we deal with disputes and disagreements? misunderstandings. And, between us, we came up with a governance framework that, yes, it depended on existing laws and jurisdictions, it complied with GDPR, but it was also values-based and based on the way the young people, youth, wanted to work with opportunity providers and with each other. And it was, based on very strongly on these youth-defined values. So I see these axes of inclusion and good governance and regulation and protection from harms. All of that comes, for me anyhow, by using and asserting our sovereignty, not just as individuals, but also as a group, as a collective. So that's my thoughts.
Thanks, Nikki. Really appreciate that. I want to, before turning to the audience, ask each of our panelists a really quick lightning round type of question, because I think it's really, really critical to ask, what is the one skill that you want every person in the room or streaming today to think about acquiring so that they are ready for the future of work in the metaverse? Nikki, I'll start with you.
Maybe counterintuitively, I say every day, make sure that you take off the headset, switch off the computer, go outside, connect with nature. Remember, this is not a separate world. This is the real world. You are you in the metaverse, and remind yourself of that every day.
Great. Thank you. Rob, what about you?
I think the metaverse in general, and specifically as relates to work, has a real potential to expand our horizons and give us access to new experiences and new people. And I hope that as we're thinking about what that looks like in terms of each of our work and our organizations and our workplaces, is really thinking about how this technology can bring us closer together and focusing on learning about different people and learning about how we can build bridges across our different communities and between each other using technology. So I think that's one of the biggest skills is really to look at this as technology that brings us closer together rather than the technology that brings us into a different space entirely.
Aisha, what about you?
I think I'm thinking about it more from a future of work, and I think it's going to be very important for us to really have the ability to learn constantly and to a certain extent move from job to job, because the world of the future of work is kind of changing very fast. So I think more sort of some power skills that are transferable, and here to me it really is about I actually agree with Dr. Settings, the ability to make connections. Now, are those done in person, like Nikki says, or will they be through the metaverse? Whichever way you go about it, I think that ability to have those connections, which essentially will lead to teamwork, creativity, and all the rest, is what is going to be important going forward.
Great. Thank you all so much. Really appreciate those insights, Rob, Nikki, and Aisha. Let me open up the floor to all of you and see, are there any questions that you have or comments that you would like to make towards our panelists today? No questions?
Yeah.
Oh,
I'm sorry,
I
go
have
ahead.
a quick one.
Please.
I wanted to just comment again on best practices, because I am a regulatory affairs professional. I've worked with other technology, including wrongful deaths. Industry and the community, if we could do more with best practices, laws will follow. So I want to just kind of hear your vibe. Is this I wrong, or is there something that we can take away that will help with this? Thank you.
Rob, do you want to go ahead and address that one?
You might have to help me. She cut out for me, so I couldn't hear. It was about best practices, but not exactly what the context was.
I wanted to get examples or takeaways on best practices rather than.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, my mic is cutting off. Yeah, I wanted to get your thoughts on best practices rather than me as a regulatory professional with warning letters, or we even talked about recalls and lawsuits, and building the regulations and the standards based on best practices. So how can we showcase those, or a kind of a takeaway, so I could.
Best practices for regulation, not best practices for using metaverse technology in your organization. Is that right?
I could even answer that one. Yeah.
Okay. Go for it.
Okay, so just very quickly, I think, thanks for the question, and we've had this sort of discussion before, because again, when we talk about regulation and innovation, how does that pan out, and it essentially does come down to sharing of best practices of how to move forward. And we had a very interesting panel recently where we the operative word really is collaboration, and I think it's going to be extremely important and vital for those that innovate, investors, regulators, to collaborate. And very 2 or 3 points on how to go forward with that. It is extremely important actually for policymakers as well to know what specific issues there are with technologies that need to be resolved. And those issues, I think the businesses and the investors and the other community has a big role to play. So I think they need to work together to identify, first of all, those issues that need to be resolved and those concerns. The second one is about experimentation and trying out, what we call sandboxes. And I know also that Meta is very big on that through their open loop, programs, where really you work together with regulators, and companies can safely test and learn, with guidance from a regulator for new technologies. So that's, to me, is also best practices, and we can go into various of those that have actually been conducted. But that also came out as one way to sort of, look at going forward. Then I think the couple of more, which is more about developing sort of risk assessment standards, which of course have to be realistic and achievable, right? And there also, this needs to be done again, coming back, collaboration with the regulators, and we have governments such as Singapore that have put very interesting, they've done great work on that as well. And one of the ones I think which is becoming more and more important, not really a best practice now, is that we need to involve those that are affected by all of these regulations, be it consumers, be it customers, be it employees. We need to have them in the loop, and we have to get their views in as soon as possible. And of course, lastly, to be always transparent and honest, be it as a government or a business. So these were a couple of points that had come through when we were looking at how to approach this topic, how to build trust, and how to work on policy together between governments as well as policymakers. So and essentially, that could be a way forward for also then helping with innovation and having sustainable technology adoption. So that would be my few words there.
Thank you so much, Aisha. Excellent answer. Very briefly, you want to make sure that we get in one more question. Ryan, you had your hand up. Can we get over to you to hear you?
Yeah, I just had a quick question for Rob. I was throughout the last few years, we've seen Meta do some incredible things and invest huge amounts of money in the promise of this technology. And it's very exciting. Obviously, I'm wearing an Oculus headset, and it's incredible. But they seem to have this aversion to regulatory oversight, and obviously the metaverse is much bigger than Meta. There's many players on the stage, and regulatory oversight is one of the ways we can ensure safety and privacy for everybody, and also interoperability and things like that. So I'm just wondering, is there still an aversion to regulatory oversight in general at Meta, or is that just a myth?
It's a really good question, and one that we've spent a lot of time thinking about, as you point out. I think it's clear that regulation does need to happen in this space, and I think that's really essential. And I think going back to some of Aisha's comments from before, some of the regulation exists already, right? So in some cases, we already have existing rules, and it's just a question of applying them to new contexts. And then there are going to be cases where different judgments are going to need to be made. So for example, it is a government's role to decide, what's a crime and not a crime. There are government's role to decide how data can and can't be used, and to regulate companies when it comes to that. And so, and actually, on data processing particularly is an area where we face quite heavy regulation. We talked earlier about regulation in Europe and GDPR, and then the FTC in the US. We have very, very ongoing regulation and oversight by both regulators and then auditors and those sorts of things. So that's a very core part of the way that we do business these days. But I actually think, more fundamentally than our company, if it's true that the metaverse is going to be one metaverse for everyone, we need to have governments involved, because we need to make judgments that don't apply just to products that my company makes or that any one company makes, right? So the role of governments is to kind of think about how technology should be used and what are the right ground rules to make sure that it's used responsibly and consistently. The one thing I would say that I think is important to keep in mind, and is a little bit different about this context versus others, is that the technology is being built as we're building the regulation, and the technology will be the same in lots of different places around the world. So having organizations that work with governments, but that cut across borders is going to be really important. I know this is an area where XRSI is doing a lot of work to figure out what are best practices and how should we be thinking about it. The World Economic Forum, I know, is a space that is thinking about this, and there are lots of different organizations that are starting to think in a transnational way about what the right way to regulate is. I think it's absolutely going to be important to happen. It needs to be done in a collaborative and coordinated way, and as Aisha said, and we also need to build technology in parallel with it, so that we're not getting to a place where technology exists in the world and is out of step with what the regulatory community thinks needs to happen.
Great. Kavya, you had your hand raised as well. Let's get a question or a comment from you, please.
Ryan, do you have a follow-up or?
Well, I was just going to say, I think it's great that Meta is here and involved with XRSI, because this is one of the only grassroots regulatory oversight frameworks that's being developed in the metaverse right now. And so seeing your involvement here and your enthusiasm for what we're trying to do, not just with Meta, but oversight for the entire industry, is really exciting, I got to say. So yeah, that's it.
Thank you, Ryan. And thank you, all of you, and Christina. Just, last moment, I just wanted to comment on the absence of lots of organizations building technology in the black box almost. And that is something that, sometimes even the silence should be noticed, and not just the people who actually show up to the table and have been engaging. So I would take this moment to ask, where exactly is Apple? And we should just note that silence. And I would ask, where is World Economic Forum? And I would note that silence too. Yes, engagement, collaboration, but we really need to make effort to show up to the tables when invitations are extended. Where exactly are the rest of the world when Meta, from time and time again, is saying, hey, we're changing this domain, there is a new iteration of the internet, and we need to start talking about it. In fact, these discussions oftentimes have been initiated and encouraged by Meta. So I'm going to take this moment to at least applaud that much and indicate to all the regulators, because we're neutral people. I give all kinds of comments and criticism to Meta. But today, as I stand here and I see Meta potentially helping organize this space for us, and all of these possible Metaverse Alliance, Digital National Alliance, the absence of so many of the players, it's so loud to me. And that's what I just wanted to comment on. And it is not to reprimand you, but it is only just to encourage you to join us in this collective effort to bring the world together and help us. We are a non-profit body and we hardly have any finances, so donate to us and help us build this safer metaverse, as we all need this absolutely. So thank you, Rob, again, and thank you, everyone. Thank you, Christina. You graciously give away all your free time, and I couldn't be more thankful. Yourself and all of XRSI, they're just, we're such a lean organization, and we need your help.
Thank you, Kavya. Thank you also again to all of our panelists. And thank you for everybody in the audience and everybody's taking time out of their day to stream and participate in Metaverse Safety Week by showing up. As Kavya said, you're all making it happen, and it's going to take all of us, as we've been hearing throughout today's day. People are important. We have to be at the center of it all. Conversations have to take place. Appreciate everybody showing up. All right, I think thanks again to everybody for participating on this panel. Lots of great insights. We are going to take a short lunch break now, and we'll be back here at 1:45 Pacific time, or 30 minutes from now. And we'll be talking about lessons learned from the internet era that we can apply to the metaverse. So don't miss out on that. Come back and we'll be back with you shortly.